So my name is Maria Magrides, and my partners couldn't be here, so bear with me. And we decided to focus on German resistance to the Nazi regime, because not a lot of people realize, but a lot of Germans actually did a lot to protest and to fight against Hitler and the Nazi regime in Germany. And they did this a lot there were a lot of youth revolts going on at the time. There were a lot of intellectual revolts going on, and there were a lot of military revolts going on as well. One of the first ones was the Edelweiss Pirates, which was a group of youth in Germany. So Hitler and the Nazis really thought that youth organizations would be a really good way to educate the German youth, because they were afraid if they waited till adulthood it would be too late and they wouldn't understand and they wouldn't support as much as they could if they were educated younger. So for the guys there was the Hitler Youth, and for the girls there was the League of German Girls, and it was mandatory to join one of these organizations. So the Edelweiss Pirates, they were protesting against that, so instead of joining the Hitler Youth or the League of German Girls, they formed their own organization and joined this instead. Another organization was the European Union, and not the European Union now. This was actually an intellectual revolt that was going on in Germany, and it was actually a group of the main guy who started it. His name was George Grosskreutz, and his wife, Dr. Anneliese Grosskreutz. They started this organization, and they also had there was a chemist, his name was Robert Havemann. There was an architect named Herbert Richter, and there was also a dentist named Paul Wrench, and they were all part of this organization, and they worked to fight fascism and Jewish persecution. And they did this by they helped hide a lot of Jews in their homes, and they also helped a lot of them flee. And the main doctor, Dr. George, he was actually a doctor for this guy named Rudolf Hess, and he was higher up in the Nazi regime, and he one day was visiting with his doctor and told him how they were going to start sending Jewish citizens to concentration camps. So he started getting his organization, the European Union, to start helping save a lot of those Jewish people. And he also did a lot to help Germans who were supposed to be going off to military service, and he would try to find ways to classify them as unfit for duty. That way they didn't have to go off and fight. So the next person is Johann Georg Elser. He was actually one of the first people to attempt to assassinate Adolf Hitler, and he did this in 1939, and this was after Hitler had been chancellor for about 6.5 years, and although most people at the time really liked and supported Hitler because he helped get them out of the Depression, he'd gotten a lot of jobs, and he was just really helping build the country back up, Elser did not like him and still did not really support him, so he attempted to bomb Hitler when he was going to the Bürgerbrau Keller, and he was going to give a speech, and he was supposed to be there from, I think, 8:30 to 10 o'clock, and the bomb was set to go off at 9:20, and he actually ended his speech at 9:07. So by the time the bomb went off, Hitler was already gone. And it just managed to, I think 7 people were killed and 7 people were injured, but none of them were Hitler. The next group is the Kreisau Circle, which was also another intellectual movement. And this was a group of people who really loved the country, but they did not love Hitler and the Nazi regime. And they wanted to find a way to build back support for Germany separate from Hitler and the Nazi regime, because they felt like they'd become very intertwined, and they were trying to figure out what kind of a plan can they get going to separate the two. And they were called the Kreisau Circle because they met at the Kreisau estate in modern-day Poland, I believe, is where it is located. And then the next one this was actually a military movement. It was called Operation Spark. and it was a code name given to the planned assassination of Adolf Hitler by the anti-Nazi conspiracy of German army officers. So this was actually German officers who disagreed with Hitler and were trying to protest against him. The next one was Operation Valkyrie, which some of y'all might be familiar with because it's actually a movie named Valkyrie that this is based off of. And Operation Valkyrie was actually a program that was set up in case something happened and communication between like the top of Germany and the reserve army of Germany was lost. It would allow the reserve army to step in and kind of take over communications. And the guy who kind of came up with this was Colonel Klaus Graf von Stauffenberg, and he started out in the Nazi army, and he ended up getting injured, and he lost 2 fingers on his right hand, or his left hand. He lost his right hand, and he lost his left eye. So he kind of like ended up changing his views on Hitler and the Nazi regime, and he started to see them differently. And so he saw this plan that they had, because when he got injured, he became part of the reserved army as opposed to the main army. And he saw this plan, and he was like, this would be a good opportunity to assassinate Hitler, create confusion, and use this plan to step in and take over so he can try and help Germany get back to how it was before Hitler was involved. And so he'd seen all these failed attempts at assassinating Hitler, and he was like, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. We're going to see if I can do this. And he, unfortunately, was not successful, but he did manage to injure Hitler. So this is actually a picture of Hitler visiting some patients in the hospital who were affected by the bomb. And if you come up and look, he actually has cotton in his ear because his eardrums ruptured from the blast. So again, really close, but he ended up surviving. The next organization is the Red Orchestra, which was just another resistance movement that had developed in Germany at the time. There was also a lot of religious resistance when Hitler first came into power. The National Socialist Party, they worked with the church to establish the German Evangelical Church. And originally, a lot of the pastors really supported this and really advocated it. But as time went on and Hitler became more powerful, he kind of started just taking over and changing a lot of the views, and the church leaders disagreed with this. So in May 1934, many members of the Pastors Emergency League, including his name is Pastor Martin Niemöller, came out saying that they denounced the German Evangelical Church and they were against it. And another prominent person in the part of the religious revolt was Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So the next one is the Rosenstrasse protest, which was actually a non-violent protest that occurred in Germany on Rosenstrasse, which is Rose Street. And what had happened was a bunch of Jewish men were arrested, and they were taken to Rosenstrasse, which was a Jewish community center, and they were held captive there, and they were supposed to be deported to Auschwitz or other concentration camps. And their wives actually stood, their wives and other relatives and loved ones, they actually stood outside on the street, and they were not violent. They were just chanting or yelling or just standing there trying to figure out what was going to happen to their husbands or their loved ones, because they feared if they got sent to a concentration camp, they would never see them again. And although they don't really know how much the women standing out there actually made a difference in their release, they eventually were released. They were rounded up at the end of February, at the beginning of March, and by March 12th, on March 1st, they started getting released, and by March 12th, they had all been released. And of the 2,000 arrested, only 25 were sent to concentration camps. So overall, most of them were released. And then we have the Self Circle, which was a group of German intellectuals who gathered regularly to discuss the evils of the Nazi regime and how Germany would eventually recover after Hitler was taken out of power. They were founded by Joshua Solf, and he was a German ambassador to Japan under the Weimar Republic. And they did a lot, again, to actively help and support Jews. They did a lot to hide them in their homes, and they also did a lot to get them out of the country so that they could be safe again. And then the Swing Kids was another youth revolt going on at the time because they saw this American way of life with the swing dance and jazz music, and they really liked that, and they really wanted to live that kind of a life. And again, like the Edelweiss Pirates, they were very much against joining like the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls. They didn't like that because they felt like it was really strict and regimented, and they wanted freedom to just express themselves and to be kids. Because most of the people who were part of the Swing Kids were about 14 to 18. A lot of them did get, there's also a movie based off of this too. You've probably seen it. It has Christian Bale in it. It came out in '93, which is where the name Swing Kids actually comes from, because the group was not actually known as the Swing Kids prior to this movie. They were known as the Swing Youth. But when this movie came out, they titled it Swing Kids, and that's kind of what they're known as now. But many of them were captured, and if they were under 18, they were sent to youth concentration camps. And if they were over 18, then they were just sent to regular adult concentration camps. And the last organization is the White Rose. And the White Rose was another intellectual movement that was going on at the time, and it really got going right after the Battle of Stalingrad, which was one of the bloodiest battles of World War II, and it was a huge defeat for Germany. And after this battle, a lot of people started changing their views on how they viewed Hitler in Germany, because prior they felt like they were going to win, things were going really good, but after the Battle of Stalingrad, they started to have doubts in how successful they were going to be. So the White Rose, they kind of played on this, and it consisted of Sophie and Hans Scholl, which were brother and sister, and their friend Christoph Probst, and they wrote letters. They just wrote like pamphlets, little essays of their thoughts and views and how they disagreed with Hitler and they disagreed with the Nazi regime and how they wanted to see change. And they actually got caught releasing these pamphlets one day, and within a couple of days they were arrested, interrogated, and executed. And typically when you were arrested, you had 90 days before they would execute you. So, yes, so there were a lot of religious, intellectual, a lot of revolting going on that not a lot of people are really aware of, but they did make a lot of difference. So.